Critical thinking is basically the superpower you didn't know you already had. It's like having a mental detective living inside your brain, wearing tiny sunglasses, sipping black coffee, and refusing to accept nonsense without evidence. It's the skill that helps you look at information and go, is this actually true? Or is this just someone's spicy opinion dressed up like a fact? In a world where everyone has something to say, your friends, your teachers, the internet, your aunt who believes every WhatsApp forward is a national emergency, critical thinking keeps you from getting mentally scammed. It's all about slowing down your brain just enough to question things instead of swallowing them like fast food. And let's be honest, our brains love fast food. They love shortcuts, quick answers, and anything that looks easy. But critical thinking says, nope, we're gonna chew this properly. At its core, critical thinking is about clarity. You're not just thinking, you're thinking about your thinking. Yes, it sounds weird, but it's powerful. You're making sure your thoughts aren't blurry, biased, or based on assumptions you picked up somewhere between childhood and Netflix. For example, if someone tells you, everybody knows this is true, your critical thinking brain jumps in like, okay, calm down. Who is everybody? Why do they know? And how do you know they know? It's like having a built-in lie detector, but instead of buzzing, it just asks smarter questions. And when life throws you complicated problems, which it always does, critical thinking helps you break things down into smaller, less intimidating pieces. It's like taking a big stressful puzzle and organizing the pieces instead of screaming at the box. Critical thinking is also about accuracy, which means actually checking your facts instead of trusting random opinions, vibes, or your own mood swings. Because let's be real, our emotions can sometimes act like bad advisors. One minute they're telling you, this is brilliant. And the next minute they're like, this is terrible. Burn everything. Critical thinking keeps your emotions in the passenger seat, not the driver's seat, so you can look at things logically. It's the process of verifying, comparing, researching, and making sure what you believe is grounded in reality, not rumors, assumptions, or the noise of the world. It's the skill that helps you separate facts from fiction, truth from exaggeration, and wisdom from nonsense. But here's the fun part. Critical thinking isn't about being negative or suspicious 24/7. You're not supposed to interrogate your friends like an FBI agent every time they tell you a story. It's more about staying curious and open. It means you're willing to change your mind when new information appears, which is honestly a sign of maturity. Think of it like upgrading your phone's software. The old version still works, but when a better update comes, you install it. Critical thinking helps you do that with your beliefs. You stay flexible, you stay open-minded, and you don't cling to old ideas just because they've been with you for years like emotional baggage. Another part of critical thinking is reasonableness. This is where you connect the dots, weigh the evidence, and make decisions that actually make sense. It prevents you from jumping to conclusions or assuming the worst. You're not just reacting, you're responding. And that difference is huge. Instead of getting swept away by drama, confusion, or other people's loud opinions, you stay balanced. You think things through. You examine both sides. You consider consequences. And you ask yourself, does this actually add up? Reasonableness is like having an inner referee that says, let's be fair. Let's be logical. Let's use actual brain cells here. Critical thinking also makes your life easier. Seriously. It improves your communication because you're able to explain yourself clearly. It makes studying easier because you can understand concepts instead of memorizing them like a stressed-out robot. It helps you solve problems instead of panicking over them. And it makes you a better decision maker because you're not acting on impulse or peer pressure. You're acting on understanding. Imagine going through life with less confusion, fewer mistakes, and more confidence. That's what critical thinking unlocks. And yes, humor helps too. Critical thinkers know how to laugh at themselves and their own biases. Because let's be honest, we all have moments where we believe something silly, fall for something fake, or assume something ridiculous. Critical thinking doesn't shame you for it, it trains you to catch yourself faster next time. It turns your brain into a sharper, smarter version of itself, one that's calm, curious, and impossible to fool. It's not about being perfect, it's about being aware. It's about thinking better today than you did yesterday and thinking even better tomorrow. Mastery matters because, let's be honest, going through life without mastering anything feels a bit like trying to assemble IKEA furniture without the instructions. You might get something that resembles a chair, but there's a solid chance it'll collapse the moment someone sits on it. Mastery is what separates guesswork from confidence, chaos from clarity, and I hope this is right from yeah, I got this. It's that feeling when you've practiced something so deeply, so consistently, that it becomes part of you. You don't just do it, you own it. And once you reach mastery in anything, your whole decision-making system levels up like your brain just unlocked cheat codes. You stop relying on luck, mood swings, or the advice of people who have no idea what they're talking about. Instead, your decisions become solid, grounded, and way harder for biases to sneak into. You're no longer flipping mental coins or guessing in the dark. You're choosing from a place of experience, clarity, and mature confidence, which feels amazing, by the way. See, when you're a beginner at something, every decision feels like that moment at a restaurant where you're staring at a 20-page menu thinking, why does this place serve sushi and burgers? What am I supposed to do with that? But when you've achieved mastery, it's like you've been eating here for years. You know what's good, you know what to avoid, and you know exactly what you want without breaking into a panic sweat. That smoothness, that ease, is what mastery gives your brain. It eliminates the mental noise. It shuts down the confusion. It gives you a clear path. Because when you've practiced a skill long enough, decision-making stops feeling like a gamble and starts feeling like wisdom. Mastery also makes you less vulnerable to bias because your brain is no longer relying on stereotypes, shortcuts, or assumptions to make choices. Beginners often panic and reach for the quickest explanation like, well, this seems right, or, I heard someone say this once, or, this is how I've always done it. But a master isn't fooled by that surface-level stuff. They've seen too many patterns, too many exceptions, too many real-life examples. They know that reality is more complicated than the simple explanations we tell ourselves. So instead of jumping to conclusions, they slow down, think clearly, examine the situation, and respond based on actual understanding. That's why mastery feels like mental armor. It protects you from your own brain's worst habits. But the best part? Mastery transforms how you communicate. When you don't really understand what you're talking about, your explanations sound like a GPS losing signal. Maybe turn left or right. I don't know, just figure it out. But when you've mastered something, your communication becomes sharp, coherent, and powerful. You're not playing word salad Olympics. You're speaking with authority because you actually understand what you're saying. People listen. People trust you. People stop interrupting you with those annoying, "Are you sure?" faces because they can feel the clarity in your reasoning. Mastery gives your argument structure. Not the kind built on guesswork, but the kind built on hours of practice, skill, and experience. That's why people who achieve mastery always seem calm. They don't over-explain. They don't panic. They don't stumble through their thoughts like a student trying to improvise an answer they didn't study for. They speak with purpose because they know what they're talking about. Their thinking is organized, their examples make sense, and their conclusions are defensible, meaning they can actually back up what they say. And that's rare these days in a world where everyone has an opinion but not everyone has understanding. Mastery sets you apart by giving your words weight. And listen, mastery isn't about being perfect. It's not about becoming some flawless robot who never makes mistakes. Masters still mess up, but the difference is they understand why they messed up, and they grow from it instead of spiraling into confusion. They see errors as information, not failure. They adjust faster, recover smoother, and improve continuously. That's why mastery looks effortless from the outside, but feels incredibly powerful from the inside. The truth is, when you master something, everything else in your life gets easier. Decision-making becomes quicker because you actually know what you're doing. Communication becomes clearer because your thoughts aren't scrambled eggs. Confidence becomes natural because you've earned it, not faked it. People respect you without you begging for approval. And your life feels less like random chaos and more like intentional direction. Mastery matters because it's the difference between living reactively and living intentionally. It's the difference between hoping things work out and having the skills to make them work out. It's the difference between stumbling through opportunities and being ready for them when they show up. Mastery is how you turn potential into power, effort into excellence, and practice into something that changes your life. And let's be real, nothing feels better than reaching a level where your brain goes, "Relax, we've done this 1,000 times." That calm, that certainty, that ease, that's why mastery matters. It doesn't just make you better at a skill, it makes you better at life. Understanding cognitive biases is basically understanding how your brain sometimes behaves like that one friend who's super confident but almost always wrong, loud, emotional, and convinced they just know. Cognitive biases are the little mental shortcuts your brain takes to save energy, except sometimes those shortcuts lead straight into a ditch. And if you don't notice them, they quietly mess with your decisions, your judgment, your beliefs, and even your relationships. They're sneaky, automatic, and incredibly human. That's why mastery, in thinking, in decision-making, in life, starts with identifying these biases before they hijack your logic like a toddler stealing the TV remote. When you don't recognize your biases, your brain feels accurate, but it's often just confident, and confidence without accuracy is basically brain-level false marketing. Let's start with the famous troublemaker, confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is like your brain's hype man. It only cheers for things you already believe and ignores everything else. If your brain had a playlist, confirmation bias would be stuck on the same 5 songs forever. This bias makes you seek out information that supports your existing beliefs while skipping right past anything that challenges you. It's why people can watch the same event and walk away with 2 completely different conclusions like they didn't even attend the same reality. Your brain isn't trying to lie to you, it's trying to keep you comfortable. It loves being right. It hates being wrong. But mastery requires you to tell your brain, "Relax, buddy, we're here to learn, not to protect your ego." When you notice confirmation bias, you start asking better questions. What would prove me wrong? What evidence am I ignoring? Am I actually right, or am I just comfortable? Suddenly your thinking becomes more balanced and far less dramatic. Then we have loss aversion, the bias that makes humans terrified of losing even a little bit more than we're excited about gaining a lot. It's basically your brain acting like every loss is a giant tragedy. For example, you can win $50 and feel mildly happy, but if you lose $50, your brain screams like your house just burned down. This bias keeps people stuck, scared, cautious, and unwilling to take smart risks. It's why someone might stay in a boring job, a dead relationship, or a bad habit, because losing something, even something small, feels worse than gaining something better. Your brain loves holding on to what it knows, even if what it knows isn't helping you. But once you recognize this bias, you start to realize that not every loss is a disaster, and not every risk is dangerous. Sometimes letting go is growth, sometimes choosing change is power, and sometimes the fear of losing is way worse than the actual loss. Understanding this bias helps you stop living like everything is a life or death situation. You start thinking calmly instead of panicking, and suddenly opportunities feel less like threats and more like possibilities. And of course, we have the superstar of biases, overconfidence. If cognitive biases had a mascot, this one would wear sunglasses, point finger guns at everyone, and say, "Trust me, I got this," right before messing everything up. Overconfidence is your brain's way of assuming it knows more than it does. It makes you believe you're right even when you're guessing. It creates illusion-level certainty, like when you're absolutely convinced you remember something correctly, and then you don't. Or when you think you can finish a task in just 10 minutes, and 3 hours later you're still struggling. Overconfidence convinces you to skip preparation, ignore warnings, and wing things you really should not be winging. But the moment you see this bias in action, you start catching yourself. You double-check facts. You ask questions. You prepare. You admit when you're unsure. And suddenly your decisions stop being reckless and start becoming reliable. You shift from "I think I know" to "let me confirm," and that small shift creates huge improvements in accuracy. Once you start recognizing these biases, something amazing happens. Your thinking gets cleaner. You start spotting the invisible ways your brain tries to distort reality. You become more aware, more intentional, and more grounded. It's like cleaning a foggy window and finally seeing the world clearly instead of guessing what's out there. Biases don't disappear, they're part of being human, but you stop letting them run the show. You start catching your mind in the act like, I see what you're doing. Not today. And every time you do that, your decision-making gets sharper, your communication gets clearer, and your confidence becomes something earned rather than assumed. Understanding cognitive biases basically trains your brain to stop believing its own nonsense. And trust me, no one, not even the smartest people, is free from nonsense thinking. Biases are universal. They show up when you're stressed, emotional, confident, tired, rushing, or even when you're trying to be logical. But recognizing them reduces systematic errors. Those repeated mistakes you don't even notice you're making. You start thinking more intentionally. You stop repeating the same patterns. You become more self-aware. And that's the beginning of mastery. Knowing how you think, spotting your blind spots, and correcting your course before small errors turn into big regrets. At the end of the day, cognitive biases aren't your enemy, they're just your brain trying to save time. But mastery means slowing down, noticing them, and thinking above them. Once you do that, your mind becomes sharper, calmer, and more accurate, kind of like upgrading from potato-quality thinking to high-definition thinking. And honestly, once you experience HD thinking, you'll never want to go back. Evaluating evidence is basically the adult version of show me the receipts. It's the skill that separates strong thinkers from people who confidently believe whatever they saw in a flashy Instagram post or a dramatic YouTube thumbnail. When you become good at evaluating evidence, you stop falling for weak claims, fake experts, and random opinions packaged as facts. Instead, you learn to dig deeper, verify information, and ask the kind of questions that make sloppy arguments crumble like a poorly built cookie. It's not about being suspicious of everything, it's about being smart enough to know that not all information is created equal. Some claims are built on real research, data, and thoughtful analysis. Others are built on vibes, exaggeration, or someone's cousin's WhatsApp message. And your job as a strong thinker is to know the difference. See, strong thinkers don't just accept a statement because it sounds convincing or is said with confidence. Confidence isn't evidence. Loudness isn't evidence. A fancy graphic isn't evidence. Evidence comes from reliable data, credible sources, and research that actually makes sense. If someone tells you, this is 100% proven, your brain shouldn't just nod like a bobblehead. Your brain should go, cool, where did you get that information? How was it tested? Who said it and why should I trust them? It's not rude, it's responsible. Because believing without checking is how people end up falling for scams, misinformation, and health tips that sound more like witchcraft than science. Good thinkers always check their sources the way a smart shopper checks expiration dates on groceries. And let's talk about studies because not all studies are equal. Some are like Michelin star meals, carefully prepared, tested, peer-reviewed, and supported by large sample sizes. Others are like expired street snacks, questionable, unreliable, and likely to cause mental indigestion. A high-quality study tells you how many people were studied, how long the research lasted, what methods were used, and how data was analyzed. It doesn't hide details. It doesn't make dramatic claims without proof. Weak studies, on the other hand, do the exact opposite. They use tiny sample sizes, like testing 3 people and acting like that represents all of humanity. They lack proper controls, ignore variables, or simply rely on correlation instead of causation. But a strong thinker knows how to spot these red flags. You learn to ask, how big was the sample? Was this double-blind? Did the researchers control for outside factors? Is this actually evidence or just a fancy-looking guess? One of the most important parts of evaluating evidence is checking the methodology, basically asking how the information was gathered. If the method is wrong, the conclusion is wrong. It's like baking a cake. You can have the fanciest frosting in the world, but if you mix salt instead of sugar, you're still getting a disaster. Good methodology follows clear procedures, uses valid tools, and avoids bias. Bad methodology is messy, unclear, and influenced by assumptions. When you start questioning methodology, you stop being impressed by fancy headlines and start being impressed by real research. You become the kind of thinker who doesn't fall for shortcuts or sloppy reasoning. You want the full story, not the highlight reel. Sampling is another big deal. Who was studied? How many? Were they representative of the whole population? Because a study about Americans that only tested 20 college students from the same town is not telling you anything meaningful. Yet so many weak claims rely on poor sampling, and most people don't even notice. But when you evaluate evidence like a pro, you catch these things instantly. Your brain becomes allergic to bad sampling. You learn that good evidence includes diversity, proper size, and realistic conditions. Weak evidence is usually built on samples so small or specific that the results barely apply to anyone. And then there's context, the thing people love to ignore. Without context, even true information can be misleading. Someone might say, this drug increased risk by 50%, and you panic, until you learn that the original risk was 1 in a million and now it's 1.5 in a million. That's still tiny. Or someone might claim something worked in one specific situation, but forget to mention it fails everywhere else. Strong thinkers always zoom out and ask, what's the full story? What were the conditions? What else was going on? Context saves you from being fooled by dramatic statements that are technically true but practically misleading. It's like reading the fine print before signing a contract. Inconvenient but life-saving. Evaluating evidence also means you develop a healthy skepticism. Not negative skepticism where you assume everything is a lie, but smart skepticism where you assume everything needs proof. You stop being impressed by claims that have no backing. You stop trusting arguments built on emotion instead of facts. And you stop believing words just because they sound scientific. Anyone can throw fancy terms around. Real evidence speaks for itself. The funny part is, once you start evaluating evidence properly, you'll see how often people make strong claims backed by absolutely nothing. You'll hear things like studies show, from someone who clearly hasn't read any study since high school. Or you'll see headlines that exaggerate research to get clicks. Or you'll notice friends sharing dramatic information with zero checking. And instead of getting frustrated, you'll laugh a little, because you'll realize how common weak thinking is, and how powerful strong thinking becomes when you practice it. Evaluating evidence isn't just an academic skill, it's a life skill. It helps you make smarter decisions, avoid scams, choose better advice, and communicate your ideas with confidence. It protects you from misinformation. It sharpens your thinking. It keeps you grounded in reality instead of floating around in assumption land. And once you start doing it consistently, you become the person people turn to when they want clarity, because you're not guessing, you're not assuming, and you're not blindly trusting. You're evaluating. And that's what strong thinkers do. They don't let weak claims waste their time. They check data, verify sources, compare information, and think carefully before accepting anything as truth. It's not overthinking, it's smart thinking. It's how you build accuracy, clarity, and good judgment. And honestly, it's how you stop getting fooled by the nonsense the world throws at you every day. Clarifying the problem is basically giving your brain glasses. Because let's be honest, most bad decisions don't come from lack of intelligence. They come from you trying to solve the wrong problem in the first place. It's like arguing with someone for 20 minutes only to realize you were both talking about completely different things. Or trying to fix your Wi-Fi when the real issue is that your laptop wasn't even connected. Humans do this all the time. We jump into solutions before understanding what we're actually dealing with. And that's how mistakes happen. Not because we're dumb, but because our brains love to sprint before they even know where the finish line is. Clarifying the problem is you grabbing your brain by the shoulders and saying, "Slow down, champ. Let's figure out what we're actually solving." One of the biggest reasons people make bad decisions is because they misunderstand the question. Someone asks themselves, "How can I make more money?" when the real question should be, "Why am I spending so much?" Or they ask, "How do I get motivated?" when the real question is, "What's draining my energy every day?" When you don't clarify the problem, your mind starts building solutions like a chef who doesn't know what dish they're making. A little of this, a little of that, total chaos, no flavor. Mastery starts when you pause and reframe the situation. What exactly is the issue? What am I trying to achieve? And what's getting in the way? That clarity alone eliminates half your confusion. Reframing the problem is like turning the camera around to look from a different angle. Sometimes the problem isn't that something is difficult. Sometimes it's that you asked the wrong question to begin with. Imagine someone saying, "How can I wake up at 4 a.m. every day?" But if you dig deeper, the real problem might be that they're sleeping at 2 a.m., eating junk at midnight, and watching 3 episodes of a show by accident. The better question is, how can I improve my nighttime routine? Once you reframe, the solution becomes obvious instead of overwhelming. Masters of decision-making don't just ask the first question that pops into their head, they keep asking until they get to the real root. Then comes identifying the unknowns, the stuff you don't know yet but absolutely need to. A lot of people skip this step because it requires admitting, "I don't have all the answers," which is apparently painful for the human ego. But ignoring unknowns doesn't make them disappear. It just means you're walking into the future blindfolded, hoping for the best. Masters aren't scared of the unknown, they list them out. They figure out what information is missing. They ask questions, research, analyze, and gather details until the picture becomes clearer. It's like assembling a puzzle. You can't complete it if you're missing half the pieces. Identifying unknowns helps you avoid assumptions that lead to disaster. And then there's setting clear decision criteria, the rules you use to choose between options. Without criteria, your decision-making becomes emotional, impulsive, and inconsistent. It's like trying to choose a car without deciding what matters. Price, safety, mileage, style, or the fact that it comes in your favorite color. Without criteria, everything feels important, which is another way of saying nothing is. Strong thinkers decide in advance what makes a choice good or bad for them. That way, when options come up, they're not swayed by pressure, noise, or temporary excitement. Decision criteria act like guardrails. They keep you from driving off the road when your emotions try to take over. People who don't clarify the problem love to jump into action because action feels good. It feels productive. But running fast in the wrong direction isn't progress, it's cardio. Clarifying the problem saves you from wasted time, energy, and stress. It's the difference between treating symptoms and treating the actual disease. It's the difference between guessing and understanding. And honestly, it's the difference between looking intelligent and looking confused. Mastery means being patient enough to sit with the problem until it makes sense. It means asking questions like, what exactly am I trying to decide? What outcome do I want? What assumptions am I making? What information am I missing? What limits or constraints exist? Once you answer these, the decision becomes so much easier it almost feels like cheating. The funny part is, once you get good at clarifying problems, life feels less chaotic. You stop getting overwhelmed by situations that used to stress you out. You stop exaggerating problems into monsters they aren't. You stop creating drama where none exists. You look at challenges calmly, break them down, reframe them, define them, and then solve them with clarity instead of panic. People around you will wonder why you're so composed, but the truth is simple. You're not any smarter, you're just seeing the real problem instead of the imaginary one. Clarifying the problem is like turning on the lights before trying to clean a room. You can't clean what you can't see. You can't fix what you don't understand. And you can't solve what you haven't clearly defined. Masters don't guess their way through problems. They illuminate them. They slow down, zoom in, ask smarter questions, and build their decisions on clarity instead of confusion. So the next time life throws something at you, don't rush. Don't overreact. Don't start solving immediately. Instead, step back, breathe, and clarify. Once the problem becomes clear, the solution becomes obvious. Almost embarrassingly obvious. And that's the beauty of mastery. Half the battle is simply understanding what you're actually fighting. Argument structure is basically the blueprint of clear thinking. The mental version of building a house that won't collapse the moment someone leans on it. Most people argue like they're throwing random ingredients into a blender and hoping it turns into a gourmet meal. But skilled thinkers? They map their arguments. They know exactly what the claim is, why they believe it, and how to defend it when someone tries to poke holes in it. It's not about being fancy or academic. It's about making sure your point actually makes sense instead of sounding like a dramatic rant with no backup. When your argument has structure, it feels solid, balanced, logical, like a house with real walls, not one held together by duct tape and optimism. Let's start with claims. A claim is basically the statement you're trying to prove, the "I believe this" part. It's the headline of your argument. If your argument were a burger, the claim is the patty. Without it, you're just chewing on lettuce and disappointment. A lot of people mess up because they don't even know what their claim is. They'll talk for 10 minutes, sound extremely passionate, and still leave you wondering, okay, but what's your actual point? Skilled thinkers keep their claim clear, specific, and recognizable. Something like, we should reduce screen time, not technology is ruining society, the youth, and probably the crops too. Clarity matters. Then come the reasons, the why behind your claim. Reasons are like the foundation and support beams of your argument. They give the claim weight. Without reasons, a claim just floats around like a balloon losing air. Strong reasons are logical, relevant, and backed by evidence, not emotion. Weak reasons? They sound like, because I said so, because I feel like it, or because someone on TikTok mentioned it once. Skilled thinkers don't rely on vibes or gut feelings to carry their argument. They provide solid, understandable explanations that make the claim feel sensible. Reasons connect the dots. They turn a statement into a case. But then we get to the part that separates the thinkers from the amateurs. Counterarguments. Counterarguments are what someone who disagrees might say. And here's the secret. Strong thinkers bring them up before anyone else does. It's like saying, I already know what you're going to argue, and here's why it doesn't break my point. This is intellectual self-defense. It shows confidence. It shows preparation. It shows that your argument didn't fall apart the moment someone raised an eyebrow. People who don't use counterarguments look unprepared and shaky, like they're hoping no one asks them a tough question. But skilled thinkers welcome pushback. They analyze it, address it, and show how their claim still stands strong. It's classy. It's smart. It's powerful. When you combine claims, reasons, and counterarguments, your argument becomes organized instead of chaotic. It becomes easy to follow instead of confusing. It becomes convincing instead of emotional. Most importantly, it highlights logical gaps before someone else embarrasses you with them. Because let's be honest, nothing is worse than confidently making a point, only for someone to ask a simple question that makes your entire argument collapse like a folding chair under too much pressure. Mapping out the structure protects you from those moments. It makes your thinking airtight. And here's the fun part. When you use argument structure well, your brain stops jumping around like a squirrel. You stop going off topic. You stop rambling. You stop repeating yourself hoping the other person will magically understand. Structured arguments feel smooth, elegant, and adult, even when the topic is simple. You could be arguing why pizza is better than burgers, and with structure you'll sound like a professional philosopher defending a thesis. People will take you seriously because your reasoning is clear, not chaotic. Another benefit? Structure helps you spot your own weak spots. When you map your argument, you immediately see where something feels shaky. Maybe your evidence isn't strong enough. Maybe your reason doesn't actually support your claim as well as you thought. Maybe your counterargument hits a little too hard, which means you need to reevaluate your position. Skilled thinkers don't hide from these weaknesses. They fix them. They strengthen their arguments the same way you tighten screws on furniture before sitting on it, just to make sure it won't collapse. Using argument structure also keeps conversations from becoming emotional roller coasters. When people argue without structure, things get messy fast. Interruptions, assumptions, generalizations, exaggerations, and personal attacks. But when you follow structure, everything becomes calmer. You focus on ideas, not emotions. You respond to reasoning, not tone. You stay on topic. You stay logical. You stay grounded. And people respect that. Even if they disagree with you, they can still see the clarity in your thought process. At the core, argument structure isn't about winning debates or sounding smarter. It's about thinking clearly. It's about making decisions based on logic instead of confusion. It's about communicating in a way that people understand and trust. And it's about making sure your thoughts aren't just loud, they're strong. So next time you make a point, map it. What's the claim? Why do you believe it? What evidence supports it? What would someone who disagrees say? And how do you respond? That's argument structure. Simple, powerful, and honestly kind of fun once you get used to it. Because when your thinking has structure, everything becomes easier. Your conversations become clearer. Your decisions become smarter. Your confidence becomes real. And your arguments? They go from fragile opinions to solid, logical, well-supported reasoning that can stand on its own 2 feet, without wobbling like a toddler learning to walk. Logical reasoning tools are basically the mental toolkits that keep your brain from acting like a confused GPS saying, recalculating, every 5 seconds. When you understand them, you stop guessing your way through life and start actually thinking your way through it, with confidence, clarity, and maybe even a little swagger. Let's break it down in a simple USA-style, friendly, slightly sarcastic tone, because why not? First up is deductive reasoning, the math class of logic. Deduction is when you start with something general and land on something specific. It's like saying, all humans need water. I'm a human. So maybe I should drink some water before I pass out like an overheated iPhone. Deductive reasoning is airtight. If the starting statements are true, your conclusion has to be true. No wiggle room, no drama, no maybe. It's the most disciplined form of reasoning, like the Navy SEAL of logic. Next is inductive reasoning, which is pretty much the opposite. Induction starts with specific observations and leads you to a general conclusion, but with a humble little disclaimer of, this is probably true, unless life decides to be weird today. For example, if you see every dog you meet wagging its tail, you might conclude that dogs are friendly. Is it likely? Yes. Is it guaranteed? Absolutely not, because somewhere out there is a chihuahua ready to ruin your theory. Inductive reasoning helps you make educated guesses based on patterns, probabilities, and experience. It's useful, practical, and how most of everyday thinking works, but it's not bulletproof. Then we have abductive reasoning, the unsung hero, or as I call it, Sherlock Holmes energy. Abduction is what you use when you have incomplete information, and you're trying to make the most reasonable guess. It's like when you walk into your kitchen, see crumbs everywhere, and your younger sibling standing there looking guilty. You don't have all the evidence, there was no crime scene investigation, no fingerprint dusting, but you confidently conclude, yep, they ate the cookies. Abductive reasoning works beautifully in real-life situations where certainty is impossible but a decision still has to be made. Doctors use it, detectives use it, and honestly, anyone who has ever had to figure out why their phone suddenly won't charge uses it too. What's powerful about knowing these 3 reasoning tools is understanding when to use each one. Deduction is for airtight logic, rules, and guaranteed conclusions. Induction is for spotting patterns, making predictions, and forming general rules from what you observe. Abduction is for interpreting clues, solving problems with missing pieces, and making the best call when life hands you half a puzzle. Mastery comes when you can switch between these modes depending on what the situation needs. A strong thinker doesn't just rely on one type, they're like a mental Swiss Army knife, picking the right tool for the right problem. And when you do that, you avoid sloppy thinking, wild conclusions, and the classic, I just felt like it was true mistakes that get people into unnecessary trouble. The coolest part is that logical reasoning isn't about sounding smart, it's about thinking smart. It's about making choices that actually make sense, building arguments that hold up under pressure, and cutting through confusion like a hot knife through butter. And honestly, it just makes life easier. Because when you understand your own thought process, the world stops feeling like a chaotic carnival ride and starts feeling like something you can actually navigate. With practice, these tools turn you into a more confident, level-headed decision-maker who doesn't fall for weak arguments, misleading claims, or your own wild assumptions. Your mind becomes sharper, calmer, and way more dependable. And that, right there, is how you quietly level up in life, one logical thought at a time.